The stars had never seemed so cold to Captain Jake Morrison as they did that morning aboard the research vessel New Horizon. 3 months had passed since his crew discovered the wormhole near Jupiter, and 2 weeks since they emerged in this distant corner of space. The readings on his instruments told a story he was still trying to understand. "Captain, we're getting some strange energy signatures from the third planet in this system," said Dr. Lisa Carter, looking up from her science station. Her blonde hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and dark circles under her eyes showed she had been working long hours. "The patterns don't match anything in our databases." Jake nodded and walked over to her station. The New Horizon was not a large ship by Earth standards. It carried only 43 people, most of them scientists and researchers. Jake himself was one of the few with military experience, having served in the Earth Defense Force before taking this assignment. The mission was simple: explore new worlds through the wormhole and look for signs of intelligent life. "What kind of energy?" Jake asked, studying the data on Lisa's screen. "It looks artificial, organized, like cities or power plants, but the technology is completely different from ours." Lisa pointed to several bright spots on the planetary scan. "Captain, I think we found what we came looking for." Across the bridge, engineer Tony Rodriguez looked up from his console. The young man from Texas had volunteered for this mission, to see the stars, though Jake suspected he was starting to miss home. "Sir, should I start preparing the communication array? If there's intelligent life down there, we should try to make contact." Jake considered this carefully. First contact with an alien species was something Earth had dreamed about for centuries. The protocols were clear: approach peacefully, attempt communication, and gather as much information as possible. But something felt wrong about this system. They had detected no radio signals, no signs of space travel, nothing that suggested a normal technological civilization. "Do it," Jake decided. "But keep the message simple. Mathematical concepts, basic peaceful intentions, that sort of thing." Tony nodded and began working on the communication systems. The New Horizon had been equipped with the most advanced communication technology Earth could build. If there was intelligent life in this system, they would find a way to talk to it. Hours passed as they worked. Lisa continued scanning the planet below, finding more evidence of large-scale construction and energy use. Tony broadcast their peaceful message in multiple formats, hoping something would get through. The rest of the crew went about their normal duties, excited by the possibility of first contact but trying not to get their hopes too high. Then the ships appeared. Chief Security Officer Ben Parker was the first to spot them on the long-range sensors. "Captain, I'm reading multiple contacts approaching our position. They're big, sir, really big." Jake rushed to the tactical station and felt his blood run cold. 12 massive vessels were moving toward them at incredible speed. Each ship was easily 5 times the size of the New Horizon, and their design was unlike anything human engineers had ever imagined. The ships looked organic somehow, with flowing lines and surfaces that seemed to shift in the starlight. "Are they responding to our communications?" Jake asked. "Negative, sir. They're not broadcasting anything we can understand, but Captain," Tony's voice was tight with concern, "their approach vector and speed suggest hostile intent. They're moving to surround us." Jake's military training kicked in immediately. This was not the peaceful first contact Earth had hoped for. "All hands to stations. Raise shields and prepare for evasive maneuvers." "Lisa, are you getting any more detailed scans of those ships?" Lisa worked frantically at her console. "Captain, the technology readings are off the charts. These ships are centuries ahead of anything we have. Their power sources alone are producing more energy than our entire ship uses in a year." The alien ships moved with precision that spoke of long experience and advanced technology. Within minutes, they had formed a perfect sphere around the New Horizon, cutting off any escape route. Jake realized with growing dread that his small research vessel was trapped by forces far beyond human understanding. "Incoming transmission," Tony reported. It's not like our communications at all. The signal is somehow going directly into our computers, bypassing our normal receivers." "Put it on screen," Jake ordered. The main display flickered and showed a face that would haunt Jake's dreams for the rest of his life. The alien was roughly humanoid, but covered in scales that shifted color in the light. Its eyes were cold and calculating, and when it spoke, its voice carried an authority that had never been questioned. Primitive vessel, you have entered the territory of the Catherian Empire. I am Commander Vorth of the Third Fleet. You will surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in the destruction of your ship and all aboard. Jake stepped forward, trying to project calm confidence despite the fear growing in his chest. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel New Horizon. We come in peace and request dialogue with your government. We had no knowledge of your territory and mean no harm. The alien's expression did not change. Your ignorance is not our concern. You will lower your shields and disable your weapons. Comply within 60 of your time units or face destruction. We don't have weapons, Jake said, which was true. The New Horizon was a research vessel, not a warship. We're explorers, scientists. We only want to learn and establish peaceful contact. Commander Vorth made a sound that might have been laughter. All species claim to be peaceful when they are weak. Your ship will be searched, your people examined, and your world's location extracted from your computers. The Catherian Empire is always interested in discovering new sources of labor. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the New Horizon in stunned silence. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Not only were his crew in immediate danger, but Earth itself was now at risk. These Catherians clearly saw humans as potential slaves, and they had the technology to make that threat real. Ben, what are our options? Jake asked quietly. The security chief shook his head grimly. Not many, sir. Our shields might hold off their weapons for a few minutes, but those ships could vaporize us whenever they choose. If we try to run, they'll catch us easily. Jake looked around at his crew. These people had volunteered for a peaceful exploration mission, not a war. But the choice was no longer theirs to make. The Catherians were coming whether they wanted to fight or not. All hands, this is the captain, Jake announced over the ship's communication system. We are about to be boarded by hostile alien forces. I know this isn't what any of us signed up for, but we may be Earth's only warning about what's coming. Everyone remember your training and prepare for the worst. The docking clamps hit the New Horizon with a sound like thunder. Jake Morrison felt the deck shake beneath his feet as the alien boarding tube sealed against his ship's hull. Through the security cameras, he could see Catherian soldiers preparing to cut through the airlock doors. Remember, we tried diplomacy first, Jake told his crew over the internal communication system. But if that fails, we make them pay for every step. Ben Parker had quietly distributed the few weapons aboard the research vessel to crew members with military training. They were not much against advanced alien technology, but they were better than nothing. Lisa Carter worked at her station, trying to download as much information about the aliens as possible onto portable storage devices. The airlock doors exploded inward with a flash of bright plasma. Catherian soldiers poured through the breach, their scaled bodies moving with deadly grace. Each one stood nearly 7 feet tall and carried weapons that hummed with barely controlled energy. Their eyes scanned the human crew with the cold calculation of predators evaluating prey. Commander Vorth entered behind his soldiers, his presence filling the cramped corridor of the human ship. His scales shifted from green to a darker, more threatening color as he looked around at the primitive human technology. I am Commander Vorth, he announced, his voice carrying easily through the ship. Your vessel is now property of the Catherian Empire. You will be questioned about your species and your home world. Those who cooperate will be granted the privilege of slavery. Those who resist will die. Jake stepped forward, his hands visible and empty. Commander, I'm Captain Morrison. As I said before, we're peaceful explorers. We have no military value and our world poses no threat to your empire. Surely we can reach some kind of understanding. Vorth's cold eyes fixed on Jake with interest. You speak as if you have a choice in this matter. Your species is new to us, which makes you valuable for study. Your world's location will be extracted. From your computers and your people will provide excellent workers for our mining colonies. Our computers are protected, Jake said, trying to buy time. Even if you take them, you won't be able to access our navigation data without our cooperation." The alien commander made that sound that might have been laughter again. "You underestimate Cytherian technology, Primitive, but you are correct that cooperation would make the process faster." Vorth gestured to one of his soldiers. "Bring the engineer forward." Two Cytherian soldiers grabbed Tony Rodriguez and dragged him to the center of the corridor. The young man's face was pale with fear, but he held his head high. Jake felt a surge of pride in his crew member's courage. "This one maintains your ship's systems," Vorth said, studying Tony like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "He will have access to your navigation computers. Perhaps a demonstration of Cytherian methods will encourage cooperation." Without warning, Vorth placed his clawed hand on Tony's forehead. The human engineer screamed as alien mental energy invaded his mind. Jake watched in horror as his crew member convulsed in agony, his body held upright only by the Cytherian soldiers gripping his arms. "Stop!" Lisa shouted from behind her console. "You're killing him!" Vorth increased the mental pressure, and Tony's screams grew louder. "Your engineer's mind is quite fragile. I am simply examining his memories of your ship's systems. The process is unfortunately painful for primitive species." Jake felt rage building in his chest. These aliens were not just invaders, they were torturers who enjoyed causing pain. But he forced himself to remain calm. Getting angry would not help Tony or the rest of his crew. "I'll give you the navigation codes," Jake said. "Just stop hurting him." "You will give them to me regardless," Vorth replied, not releasing his mental hold on Tony. "This is merely to demonstrate the futility of resistance." That was when Ben Parker made his move. The security chief had been slowly positioning himself near one of the Cytherian soldiers, and now he struck with all the speed and skill his military training had given him. His improvised weapon, a heavy wrench from the engineering kit, caught the alien in the side of the head with a sound like a breaking stone. The Cytherian staggered but did not fall. Instead, it turned toward Ben with eyes that blazed with fury. But the brief distraction was enough. Jake lunged forward and knocked Vorth away from Tony, breaking the mental connection. The young engineer collapsed, blood trickling from his nose, but he was still breathing. "So you choose resistance?" Vorth said, rising to his feet with predatory grace. "How refreshing. It has been some time since we encountered a species with any fighting spirit." The battle that followed was brief and desperate. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with the fury of people defending their lives and their world. Ben Parker led the charge, using his knowledge of the ship's layout to create ambushes in the narrow corridors. Lisa Carter proved that scientists could be warriors when necessary. She had modified the ship's medical scanners to emit frequencies that disrupted Cytherian mental abilities, giving the humans a small advantage. Several aliens found their psionic powers failing at crucial moments, allowing human fighters to land telling blows. But the outcome was never really in doubt. Cytherian weapons cut through human defenses like paper. Their superior strength and speed made them deadly opponents even without their advanced technology. One by one, Jake's crew members fell to enemy fire or were overwhelmed by alien soldiers. Jake found himself backed into the ship's bridge. The last few survivors gathered around him. Tony was barely conscious but still trying to delete files from the navigation computer. Lisa worked frantically at her console, uploading data about the Cytherians to a hidden transmitter. "Captain," she said urgently, "I'm getting a transmission ready to send back through the wormhole to Earth. It contains everything we've learned about these aliens and their technology, but I need more time." Jake looked around the bridge at the faces of his remaining crew. They were scared but determined, ready to die to protect their home world. He felt a fierce pride in these people who had volunteered for peaceful exploration, but were willing to fight when fighting became necessary. "Buy her that time," Jake ordered. "Whatever it takes." Ben Parker nodded grimly and checked his remaining ammunition. "Understood, sir. They want to fight, we'll give them one they'll remember." The final assault came minutes later. Cytherian soldiers poured onto the bridge, their weapons blazing. Ben fell defending the main console, his body shielding the computer systems. 2 other crew members died trying to hold the auxiliary stations, but Lisa completed her transmission, The burst of data shot through space toward the wormhole, carrying humanity's first and possibly last warning about the Catherian Empire. It contained detailed scans of alien technology, tactical information about their fighting methods, and psychological profiles based on their behavior during the boarding action. Jake was the last one standing when Commander Vorth finally stepped onto the bridge. The alien commander looked around at the destruction with something that might have been approval. "Your species shows promise," Vorth said, his scales shifting to a color Jake had not seen before. "Most civilizations surrender immediately when faced with Catherian superiority. Your people chose to fight even when victory was impossible. We won't be your slaves," Jake said, blood running from a cut on his forehead. "No," Vorth agreed. "You will serve the Empire in a different capacity. Your species will be studied, cataloged, and prepared for conquest. Your world will provide excellent subjects for our expansion programs." Jake felt despair settling over him like a cold blanket. Earth was doomed, and it was his fault for leading the aliens to humanity's home. But then he remembered Lisa's transmission racing toward the wormhole, and he felt a spark of hope. Earth would be warned. Humanity would be ready. Commander Vorth seemed to read his thoughts. "You believe your warning will save your people? How amusing. The Catherian Empire has conquered over 200 species in this galaxy. All of them received warnings. None survived." Admiral Helen Ross stared at the emergency session screen in the United Earth Government's war room, her face pale with shock. The transmission from Jake Morrison's expedition had arrived 12 hours ago, and she still could not believe what she was seeing. The data showed alien technology so advanced that humanity's best warships looked like toys in comparison. "How long do we have?" President Maria Santos asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. The president had called together Earth's top military leaders and scientists within an hour of receiving Morrison's warning. According to the transmission data, the aliens are preparing what they call a standard conquest fleet, Admiral Ross replied. "Based on their previous patterns, that means at least 200 warships. Captain Morrison estimated they would need 6 months to organize such a force." Dr. Alex Chen, Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, studied the behavioral data Morrison had gathered. The tall, thin scientist had spent years preparing for first contact, but not like this. The Catherians operate on a system of assumed superiority. They've never encountered serious resistance from any species they've conquered. That might be our only advantage. "What kind of advantage?" President Santos asked. Alex pointed to his analysis charts on the main screen. "They rely heavily on psychological intimidation and technological supremacy. When they encounter a new species, they expect immediate surrender after a show of force. They've never had to adapt their tactics or develop new strategies because nothing has ever challenged their methods." Admiral Ross leaned forward. "Are you saying we might actually have a chance against them?" "Not with conventional tactics," Alex admitted. "But Captain Morrison's data shows they think in very rigid patterns. They expect their enemies to form traditional battle lines, to fight by the rules of civilized warfare. If we can surprise them with completely different approaches, we might be able to exploit their overconfidence." President Santos stood and walked to the window overlooking Earth's orbital defense platforms. The stations looked impressive against the starfield, but she knew they would not last minutes against Catherian plasma weapons. "What do you need to make this work?" Admiral Ross had been thinking about this question since the transmission arrived. "We need new technology, new weapons, and new tactics. Most importantly, we need a ship that can stand up to their dreadnoughts, long enough to prove that humans won't surrender easily." "How long would such a ship take to build?" the president asked. Chief Engineer Ryan Brooks spoke up from his position at the technical console. The grizzled veteran had designed Earth's current fleet, but he knew it was obsolete before the first alien ship appeared. "With conventional construction methods, at least 3 years. We don't have that kind of time." "Then we don't use conventional methods," Admiral Ross said firmly. "I'm authorizing Operation Thunderstrike. We build one ship using every advanced technology we have. We strip resources from every other project if necessary." Ryan's eyes widened. "Admiral, what you're talking about would bankrupt our entire..." Defense budget. We're talking about experimental systems that haven't been tested, technologies that might not even work. Then we better make sure they work, Admiral Ross replied. Because if they don't, there won't be a defense budget to worry about. President Santos nodded slowly. Do it. Give Admiral Ross whatever she needs. Every resource, every scientist, every engineer. This is humanity's survival we're talking about. Over the following weeks, the greatest construction project in human history began taking shape. The battleship Terran Defiance grew in the orbital shipyards like a metal flower reaching toward the stars. Unlike the sleek practical designs of Earth's existing fleet, the Defiance was built for one purpose: to hurt the Catherians badly enough to make them think twice about conquering humanity. Captain Steve Murphy walked through the ship's corridors during the final construction phase, marveling at what human engineering had accomplished in such a short time. The ship was larger than anything Earth had ever built, its hull filled with experimental weapons and defensive systems that existed nowhere else in human space. How are the railgun systems looking? Steve asked Lieutenant Commander Kate Sullivan as they toured the weapons deck. Kate had volunteered to serve as the ship's tactical officer, despite having no experience with the experimental systems they would be using. Terrifying, Kate replied honestly. We're accelerating solid projectiles to 20% of light speed. The power requirements are enormous, and we're not entirely sure what will happen when we fire them in actual combat. Steve nodded grimly. The railguns were humanity's answer to Catherian energy shields. Morrison's data suggested the aliens had never encountered kinetic weapons moving at such extreme velocities. The theory was that their shields would be designed to deflect energy beams, not solid matter traveling at relativistic speeds. Commander Rick Taylor joined them from the engineering section, his hands still dirty from working on the ship's adaptive targeting systems. The AI is learning faster than we expected, he reported. We've been feeding it every piece of tactical data from Morrison's transmission, and it's developing combat strategies we never would have thought of. Is that good or bad? Steve asked. Rick grinned. Probably both. The system is suggesting maneuvers that would turn most human pilots into paste. But it might be exactly what we need against enemies who think they know how space battles work. Meanwhile, in a secret facility beneath Colorado, weapons specialist Colonel Nina Hayes was putting the finishing touches on humanity's most desperate gambit. The new point defense systems were designed to track and destroy hundreds of targets simultaneously, turning the space around the Terran Defiance into a killing field for enemy fighters. The system works by creating overlapping fields of fire, Nina explained to her team of technicians. Each automated gun can track up to 50 targets at once. If the aliens try to overwhelm us with numbers, they're going to get a very unpleasant surprise. But even as Earth's best minds worked to prepare for the coming war, reports continued to arrive about the enemy's strength. Intercepted alien communications suggested that the Catherian invasion fleet was even larger than originally estimated. Admiral Zektar, the Empire's most successful conqueror, had been placed in command of the expedition. He's conquered 18 different species in the past century, Dr. Chen reported during a strategy meeting. Never lost a single battle. His flagship, the Eternal Dominion, is the size of a small city and carries enough firepower to crack a planet's surface. Admiral Ross studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. One ship against 200. Even with all our advantages, the odds are impossible. Maybe that's exactly what we need, Dr. Chen suggested. The Catherians expect us to surrender when we see how outnumbered we are. If we fight anyway, it might shock them into making mistakes. President Santos had been listening to the discussion from her position at the head of the table. There's something else to consider, she said, quietly. This isn't just about winning a battle. It's about proving to the galaxy that humanity won't be conquered. Even if we lose, we need to hurt them badly enough that other species will know resistance is possible. Admiral Ross nodded slowly. The president was right. Earth's defense was about more than just survival. It was about setting an example for every other species the Catherians had enslaved or planned to conquer. Humanity needed to show the galaxy that the Empire was not invincible. As the months passed and construction of the Terran Defiance neared completion, news arrived that changed everything. The Catherian invasion fleet had begun moving toward the EL wormhole. Admiral Zektar was confident enough in his forces to begin the conquest ahead of schedule. "How much time do we have?" President Santos asked during an emergency meeting. 2 weeks, maybe less," Admiral Ross replied. "The Defiance isn't finished. We're missing half our planned escort fleet, and our crews have barely had time to train with the new systems. Then we fight with what we have," the president decided. "Captain Murphy, is your ship ready for battle?" Steve Murphy thought about all the systems that were still being installed, all the weapons that had never been fired except in computer simulations, all the ways this desperate gamble could go wrong. But he also thought about Jake Morrison and his crew somewhere in alien hands, counting on Earth to be ready when the invaders came. "She'll have to be," Steve said simply. "We don't get to choose when this war starts." The wormhole twisted space around itself like a wound in reality, and through that wound came death. Admiral Zektar's invasion fleet emerged from the dimensional gateway in perfect formation, 200 warships arranged in the traditional Catherian battle pattern that had conquered every species they had ever encountered. From his position on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Zektar looked upon the small blue world that would soon belong to the Empire. Earth hung in space like a jewel, its white clouds and blue oceans reminding him of dozens of other worlds he had claimed for Catherian glory. "Scan the system," Zektar commanded his sensor officer. "I want to know the location of every human, ship and defense platform." The results appeared on his tactical display within moments. Zektar felt a familiar satisfaction as he studied the pathetic human defenses. 12 small destroyers, 8 slightly larger cruisers, and 1 unusual vessel that appeared to be some kind of experimental battleship. Against his 200 dreadnoughts, the humans had assembled barely 20 ships. "Shall I broadcast the surrender demand?" his communications officer asked. Zektar was about to give the order when something caught his attention. The human ships were not running. Every other species he had conquered had either surrendered immediately upon seeing his fleet or attempted to flee to the outer system. These humans were actually moving to engage his forces. "Fascinating," Zektar said to himself. "They intend to fight." On the bridge of the Terran Defiance, Captain Steve Murphy watched the alien fleet deploy with the calm of a man who had already accepted his death. The Catherian ships were even more massive than Morrison's data had suggested. Each dreadnought was easily 10 times the size of his battleship, and their energy readings showed weapon systems that could vaporize cities. "They're moving into standard attack formation," Lieutenant Commander Kate Sullivan reported from the tactical station. "Looks like they expect us to form a battle line and trade shots like a traditional fleet engagement." Steve smiled grimly. "Then let's give them something they won't expect. Signal the fleet. Execute Plan Delta." The human ships scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Instead of forming the neat battle lines the Catherians expected, they spread out across 3 dimensions, using every piece of cover the solar system could provide. Destroyers ducked behind asteroids. Cruisers used the gravity wells of planets to slingshot into unexpected attack positions, and the Terran Defiance charged straight at the center of the alien formation. Admiral Zektar watched this maneuver with puzzlement. "What are they doing? This is not how civilized species conduct space warfare." "Perhaps they are attempting to flee," suggested his tactical officer, a younger Catherian who had never seen a species actually choose to fight. "No," Zektar realized. "They are attacking. All ships, open fire. Destroy the primitive vessels before they can reach firing range." The space around Earth lit up with plasma beams as 200 Catherian ships opened fire simultaneously. But the scattered human vessels were difficult targets, and many of the energy bolts missed their intended marks. The few hits that connected struck shields that had been designed specifically to absorb Catherian-style energy weapons. "First blood to us," Kate reported, as she watched alien fire splash harmlessly off their defensive barriers. "The shields are holding better than expected." Steve nodded but kept his attention focused on the tactical display. The real test would come when they reached firing range. Everything depended on whether their experimental weapons could punch through alien defenses. "Railguns coming online," Commander Rick Taylor announced from his engineering station. "All systems show green. We're ready to show these aliens what kinetic energy can do. The Terran Defiance shuddered as its massive railgun systems fired their first salvo. Solid tungsten projectiles, each one weighing several tons, accelerated to 20% of light speed in the space of a few seconds. The energy requirements were enormous, draining power from every other system on the ship. Admiral Zektar felt his confidence waver as the human projectiles struck his fleet. The kinetic rounds punched through Catherian shields like they were made of paper, tearing massive holes in the hulls of 3 dreadnoughts. He had never seen weapons that could penetrate Imperial defenses so easily. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our shields can stop any energy weapon." "The humans are using solid projectiles, Admiral," his science officer reported, her voice tight with shock. "Our shields are designed to deflect plasma and laser beams. They cannot stop physical matter traveling at these velocities." Zektar felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest: uncertainty. These primitive humans had found a weakness in Catherian technology that no other species had ever discovered. But he was still Admiral Zektar, and his fleet still outnumbered, the humans 10-1. "All ships focus fire on the human battleship," he commanded. "Destroy that vessel and the rest will surrender." But focusing fire on the Terran Defiance proved easier said than done. Captain Murphy had studied Morrison's data on Catherian tactics, and he knew they preferred to eliminate enemy command ships. First, he kept his battleship moving in unpredictable patterns, using the ship's advanced maneuvering systems to avoid the worst of the incoming fire. Meanwhile, the scattered human destroyer and cruiser squadrons began their own attacks. Each ship carried miniaturized versions of the railgun technology, and they used hit-and-run tactics to strike at the edges of the Catherian formation. The aliens found themselves under attack from dozens of different directions simultaneously. Their command structure is too rigid, Kate observed as she tracked the alien response patterns. When we attack from multiple vectors, their coordination breaks down. They're not used to enemies that won't fight fair. Steve was about to respond when proximity alarms began screaming throughout the ship. A wing of Catherian fighters had broken through their defensive perimeter and was closing fast. "Point defense systems online," Colonel Nina Hayes announced from her position at the weapons control station. She had insisted on personally overseeing the experimental defensive grid during its first combat test. What happened next was unlike anything seen in previous space battles. The Terran Defiance's automated defense network came alive like a living thing, tracking hundreds of incoming targets with inhuman precision. Streams of projectiles filled the space around the human battleship, each one guided by artificial intelligence systems that learned and adapted with every shot. The Catherian fighter pilots had expected to overwhelm the human ship with superior numbers, but they found themselves flying into a killing field that seemed to anticipate their every move. Fighter after fighter exploded in brilliant flashes as the point defense grid found its targets. Admiral Zektar watched his elite pilots die and felt something cold settle in his chest. These humans were not fighting like any species he had ever encountered. They used weapons and tactics that seemed designed specifically to counter Catherian advantages. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we are receiving a transmission from the human commander." "Put it through," Zektar commanded. Captain Murphy's face appeared on the main display, his uniform torn from battle damage but his eyes blazing with determination. "This is Captain Steve Murphy of the Terran Defiance. I have a message for Admiral Zektar." "Speak, human," Zektar replied, curious to hear what this primitive creature thought it could accomplish. "You came to our world expecting easy conquest," Murphy said calmly. "You thought we would surrender when we saw your superior numbers. You were wrong. Humanity doesn't surrender, we don't kneel, and we don't forgive those who threaten our families." Zektar felt a chill run down his scaled spine. In 2 centuries of conquest, no enemy commander had ever spoken to him with such absolute confidence in the face of overwhelming odds. "You have fought bravely," Zektar admitted, "but you cannot win. Surrender now and I will grant your species the honor of serving the Empire as valued slaves rather than as conquered subjects." Murphy's smile was cold as the space between stars. "Counteroffer, Admiral. Leave our system now and we'll let some of your ships survive to carry word back to your empire. Stay, and we'll show you what humans do to would-be conquerors." Theo. Transmission ended, leaving Admiral Zektar staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders, but for the first time in his long career, the Great Conqueror was not sure what those orders should be. The humans had hurt his fleet badly with their first attack. 3 dreadnoughts were crippled, dozens of fighters destroyed, and his tactical formations were in chaos. But he still had overwhelming superiority in numbers and firepower. The question was whether these strange humans had any more surprises waiting for him. Looking at the tactical display, Zektar made his decision. All ships prepare for final assault. We end this now. The battle for Earth had been raging for 18 hours, and Captain Jake Morrison could feel it through the hull of the Eternal Dominion. Every explosion, every impact of human weapons against Catherian shields sent vibrations through the massive alien flagship. From his cell in the ship's detention center, Jake listened to the sounds of his species fighting for survival. "They're actually doing it," whispered Dr. Lisa Carter from the cell beside his. The scientist had spent months as a prisoner, forced to provide information about human biology and psychology to her captors, but her spirit had never been broken. "I can hear the damage reports on the internal communication system. Your people are hurting them, Jake." Jake pressed his ear to the wall, trying to make sense of the alien voices echoing through the ship's corridors. He had learned enough of the Catherian language during his captivity to understand basic commands, and what he was hearing filled him with fierce pride. The aliens were panicking. "Damage report from Section 7, came a voice over the ship's internal speakers. "Hull breach on Deck 15. Emergency teams respond immediately." Another voice followed moments later. "Fire suppression systems failing. In Engineering Bay 3, recommend evacuation of all personnel." Jake smiled grimly. The Terran Defiance was making Admiral Zekatar pay for every meter of space. But Jake also knew the human ship could not win this battle through firepower alone. The odds were simply too great. If Earth was going to survive, something had to change those odds. That was when Jake remembered the sabotage plan he had been working on during his months of imprisonment. He had studied the ship's layout, memorized guard rotations, and identified critical systems that could be disrupted. The plan had been a desperate hope for escape, but now it could serve a greater purpose. "Lisa," he whispered to the cell next to his. "Remember those system blueprints you were forced to translate for them? The ones showing the ship's power distribution network?" "Of course," she replied quietly. "They wanted to understand how human ships were powered so they could better target our vessels." "Why?" "Because I think I know how to turn their own ship against them," Jake said, his mind racing through the possibilities. "But I'm going to need your help with the technical details." Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Zektar was discovering what it meant to fight an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. The human ships continued their chaotic attack patterns, striking from unexpected angles and then disappearing before his forces could respond effectively. "Status report," Zektar commanded, his usual calm beginning to crack under the strain of a battle that should have been finished hours ago. 63 ships damaged or destroyed, his tactical officer reported, his voice tight with disbelief. "The humans have lost 8 vessels, but their remaining ships show no signs of withdrawing." Zektar studied the tactical display with growing frustration. In any normal battle, losing a third of their fleet would cause the enemy to surrender immediately. These humans seemed to become more determined with each ship they lost. "Admiral," his communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving reports from across the fleet. The human ships are coordinating their attacks in ways we've never seen before. It's as if they can predict our movements." The truth was even more disturbing than the aliens realized. The Terran Defiance's artificial intelligence system was learning from every exchange of fire, analyzing Catherian response patterns and developing new tactics in real time. What had started as experimental technology was evolving into something that could think and adapt faster than any organic mind. "Captain," Steve Murphy felt the ship shudder around him as another plasma beam found its target. The Terran Defiance had taken severe damage, but her experimental systems were holding together better than anyone had dared hope. More importantly, they were proving that human technology could compete with the best the galaxy had to offer. "Hull, integrity at 60%. Commander Rick Taylor reported from his engineering station. "We've lost 3 of our main railgun systems, but the remaining weapons are still operational." "How many alien ships have we taken out?" Steve asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. They had been fighting for their lives for hours, but the Catherian fleet still seemed endless. "Confirmed kills on 47 enemy vessels," Lieutenant Commander Kate Sullivan announced, her voice filled with amazement. "Damage to at least 30 more. Captain, we're actually winning this." Steve looked at the tactical display and felt his heart sink. 47 ships destroyed out of 200 was impressive, but it was not enough. The aliens still had overwhelming numerical superiority, and the Terran Defiance could not keep fighting much longer. That was when the unexpected happened. Deep in the bowels of the Eternal Dominion, Jake Morrison put his sabotage plan into action. He had been working for hours to disable the security systems on his cell, using techniques he had learned during his military training. The Catherians had underestimated human ingenuity when they designed their prison systems. "The power conduits run through this section," Lisa whispered as they crept through the ship's maintenance tunnels. "If we can overload the main distribution node, it should cascade through the entire network." Jake nodded and began working on the alien control systems. The Catherian technology was advanced, but not impossible to understand, especially after months of observation. He found the power regulation controls and began making modifications. "What exactly are we trying to accomplish?" Lisa asked as she kept watch for guards. "We're going to give Admiral Zektar a very bad day," Jake replied, his hands working quickly on the alien machinery. "If this works, every ship in his fleet is going to lose targeting data at the same time." The sabotage was more complex than simply cutting power lines. Jake had to carefully modify the ship's navigation and communication systems so that false information would be transmitted to the rest of the fleet. It was delicate work that required precise timing, but it was humanity's best chance to even the odds. On the bridge of the Terran Defiance, Captain Murphy was preparing for what he expected to be his final attack when something extraordinary happened. The Catherian fleet suddenly stopped firing in coordinated patterns. Ships that had been working together moments before began targeting empty space or, in some cases, each other. "What's happening?" Steve demanded. Kate stared at her, sensors in disbelief. "The alien fleet is in complete chaos. Their targeting systems seem to be malfunctioning across multiple ships simultaneously. It's like they've lost all coordination." Steve realized this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. "Signal all human ships, general attack, hit them, while they're confused." The remaining human vessels struck like a pack of wolves, targeting the most damaged alien ships first. Without coordinated defense, the Catherian dreadnoughts became sitting targets for human railgun systems. Ship after ship exploded in brilliant flashes as kinetic rounds found their marks. Admiral Zektar watched his carefully planned invasion crumble into disaster. "What is causing this system failure?" he roared at his technical staff. "Unknown, Admiral," came the panicked reply. "All our navigation and targeting computers are receiving false data. We cannot coordinate fleet movements or target enemy vessels accurately." Zektar felt the cold touch of defeat settling on his shoulders. In 2 centuries of conquest, he had never faced such a combination of enemy innovation and internal system failure. The humans had somehow turned his own technology against him. "All ships fall back to defensive positions," he commanded. "Emergency protocols. Each ship fights independently until we can restore communication." But it was too late. The human attack had shattered his formation, and individual Catherian ships found themselves facing multiple human vessels at once. The aliens' technological superiority meant nothing when they could not coordinate their efforts or target their enemies effectively. Jake Morrison felt the flagship shaking around him as human weapons found their targets. His sabotage was working, better than he had dared hope, but he knew it was only a temporary advantage. Soon the aliens would discover the source of their problems and find a way to fix them. "We need to get to the bridge," he told Lisa as they moved through the ship's corridors. "If we can capture Admiral Zektar, we might be able to end this battle without destroying every ship in his fleet." Lisa looked at him with concern. "Jake, there are hundreds of alien soldiers between us and the bridge. We'll never make it." Jake smiled grimly. Then we better make sure our attempt counts for something. Come on, Dr. Carter. Let's go save Earth. The corridors of the Eternal Dominion echoed with the sounds of a dying ship. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls as Captain Jake Morrison and Dr. Lisa Carter made their way toward the bridge, moving through maintenance shafts and service tunnels to avoid the alien security teams searching for them. The power overloads are spreading faster than I expected, Lisa whispered as they paused at an intersection. I can hear the automatic system shutting down all over the ship. Jake nodded grimly. His sabotage had worked better than planned, but it was also more dangerous than he had anticipated. If the flagship lost all power, it might take the human prisoners down with it. They had to reach the bridge before the cascading failures destroyed the entire vessel. Behind them, they could hear Cytherian search teams getting closer. Admiral Zektar had finally realized that his system failures were not accidental, and he had deployed his entire security force to find the saboteurs. But Jake had spent months studying this ship, and he knew passages that even some of the crew had forgotten. Through here, he said, leading Lisa into a narrow access tunnel that ran directly toward the command section. This conduit carries power to the bridge systems. If we're lucky, we can reach the command center before they think to look for us there. On the bridge of the Terran Defiance, Captain Steve Murphy watched the tide of battle turn in humanity's favor with amazement that bordered on disbelief. The Cytherian fleet was in complete chaos, their ships firing at shadows while human vessels picked them off one by one. Confirmed destruction of the alien command ship Stellar Crusher, Lieutenant Commander Kate Sullivan reported, her voice tight with exhaustion. They had been fighting for nearly 20 hours, and the strain was showing on everyone. That brings our total to 112 enemy vessels destroyed or disabled. Steve felt a moment of fierce satisfaction, but he knew the battle was not over yet. Admiral Zektar's flagship was still intact, and as long as the Eternal Dominion remained operational, the alien commander could potentially restore order to his fleet. Can we get a clear shot at their flagship? He asked. Commander Rick Taylor shook his head from his position at the engineering console. Negative, Captain. The Eternal Dominion is using the wreckage of its own fleet as cover. We'd have to get within point-blank range to guarantee a killing shot, and that would put us in range of every weapon the ship carries. Steve considered their options. The Terran Defiance had taken enormous damage during the battle. Her hull was cracked in a dozen places, half her weapon systems were offline, and her shields were operating at less than 30% efficiency. A direct assault on the alien flagship would be suicide. That was when Kate's sensors picked up something unexpected. Captain, I'm reading massive power fluctuations aboard the Eternal Dominion. It looks like their entire electrical grid is failing. System failure or battle damage, Steve asked. Unknown, sir, but whatever's causing it, the alien flagship is losing power at an exponential rate. If this continues, they'll be dead in space within the hour. Steve smiled grimly. Someone aboard that ship was fighting back, and he had a strong suspicion who it might be. Signal the fleet. All ships converge on the Eternal Dominion. We finish this now. Meanwhile, deep in the bowels of the alien flagship, Jake Morrison was discovering just how far Cytherian engineering had advanced beyond human technology. Even with catastrophic system failures cascading through the ship, backup power systems were keeping critical areas operational. The bridge would be the last section to lose power, which meant he and Lisa had to reach it soon. Jake, Lisa whispered, urgently. I can hear them behind us. The search teams are getting close. Jake could hear them too. Alien voices echoing through the corridors, growing louder with each passing minute. But they were almost to the bridge now. He could see the command section security door just ahead. When we get in there, he told Lisa quietly, stay behind me and try to reach the communication console. If you can send a message to the human fleet, tell them we're aboard this ship. Maybe they can coordinate their attack with what we're doing. Here. Lisa nodded, her face pale but determined. She had endured months of imprisonment and torture, but her spirit remained unbroken. What are you going to do? Whatever it takes to stop Admiral Zektar, Jake replied simply. The bridge security door had been designed to keep enemies out, but it had not been built to resist sabotage from within. Jake had studied the door's control mechanisms during his captivity. and he knew exactly where to apply pressure to override the locking systems. Within minutes, they had gained access to the command center of the most powerful ship in the Catherian fleet. Admiral Zektar stood at the center of his bridge, his scaled skin dark with rage as he watched his invasion fleet die around him. Reports were coming in from all over the ship about system failures and power losses, but he refused to believe that primitive humans could cause such damage to Catherian technology. "Admiral," his communications officer announced, "we have intruders on the bridge." Zektar turned to see two humans emerge from the maintenance access, their clothes torn and dirty but their eyes blazing with determination. He recognized the male immediately as the captain of the first human ship he had captured, the one who had been imprisoned for months in the detention center. "Captain Morrison," Zektar said, his voice carrying a note of grudging respect. "I should have known you were responsible for this chaos. How did you manage to sabotage systems you could not possibly understand?" Jake stepped forward, keeping his body between Lisa and the alien bridge crew. "You made a mistake, Admiral. You assumed that because humans use simpler technology, we're not smart enough to understand yours. But we've been studying your ship for months. And now you think you can stop the conquest of your world?" Zektar asked, genuinely curious about what these primitives hope to accomplish. "The conquest is already stopped," Jake replied calmly. "Look at your tactical display. Your fleet is destroyed, your ships are dead in space, and my people are closing in to finish what's left." Zektar glanced at the tactical screen and felt cold despair settle in his chest. The human was right. Of his 200 warships, fewer than 50 were still capable of fighting. The rest were either destroyed or so damaged they posed no threat to anyone. "Even if you have won this battle," Zektar said, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of conquest, "you have only delayed the inevitable. The Catherian Empire spans hundreds of worlds. Other fleets will come. Your species will be conquered. Eventually." Jake smiled, and there was something in that expression that made even the mighty Admiral Zektar feel uneasy. "That's where you're wrong, Admiral. You see, we humans have a saying: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. You've spent centuries conquering species that had no choice but to submit. But now the galaxy knows that resistance is possible." Lisa had reached the communication console and was working frantically to establish contact with the human fleet. "Jake," she called out, "I'm getting through to the Terran Defiance. Captain, Murphy is requesting instructions." "Tell him to broadcast this conversation on all frequencies," Jake said, never taking his eyes off Admiral Zektar. "Every species in this sector should hear what I'm about to say." Zektar realized what the human was planning and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. Not fear of death, but fear of what this moment might mean for the Empire. He had served his entire life. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of Earth," Jake announced, his voice carrying clearly through the ship's communication systems and out to the listening galaxy. "For 3,000 years, the Catherian Empire has ruled. Through fear and superior technology, they told every species they conquered that resistance was futile, that surrender was the only option." He gestured toward the tactical display showing the wreckage of the alien fleet. "Today, humanity proved them wrong. We are not an advanced species. We don't have their weapons or their ships. But we had something they didn't expect: the refusal to kneel to tyrants." Admiral Zektar watched his life's work crumble as the humans' words spread across the communication networks of dozens of worlds. On planets throughout the sector, enslaved species were hearing that the mighty Catherian fleet had been defeated by primitives who refused to surrender. "The Empire is not invincible," Jake continued. "Their ships can be destroyed, their admirals can be beaten, and their rule can be ended. All it takes is the courage to fight back." The bridge fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the dying ship. Zektar looked around at his crew and saw fear in their eyes for the first time. They had served the Empire believing it was eternal and unstoppable. Now they were learning that even the greatest powers could fall when good people chose to resist. "You have doomed my empire," Zektar said quietly. "No," Jake replied. "Your empire doomed itself the day it decided that might makes right." We just reminded the galaxy that tyrants are only as strong as the fear they create. Outside, the human fleet closed in on the crippled alien flagship. Captain Murphy watched the Eternal Dominion's lights flicker and die as the last of its power. Systems failed. The greatest ship in the Catherian fleet was now nothing more than a tomb drifting through space.